This is more or less it, more or less. So for those of you who were today in this morning's session, in the panel, I'm sorry, my take on what I'm going to tell you or to share with you is that all of this could have been used as like a side note to what was discussed in the panel, or as a supplementary online material. And it fits very nicely with the work, some of the work that was presented here today. And the place where I want to start this, I'm going to show you, unlike a lot of the work in this conference that really is inspiring and telling us how we can make the world a better place because people will give more and help more, this is not one of those. It's not, and it's not a doomsday presentation, but it's definitely not a La La Land one. So I want to start with the results that were presented here at SPI last year. For those of you that were here, Ashley mentioned our paper on overhead aversion. And I'm starting here because this is where everything else is going to come to follow from. So in that study, essentially, we compared 4 types of charitable appeals that were sent by mail. There was a control. There was a SID condition in which we informed the mailer told people, well, we had a large donor give us so-and-so money. The money was always the same in all these 3 conditions. We're using it in a SID model, right? So this is our SID funding, meaning that we already raised this amount, and everything you give is on top of that. So that was SID funding. We compared it with matching, in which we told individuals in that group, we received that same amount. We're going to use it in a matching model, meaning that for any dollar that you will give, we will match with $1 up to that ceiling of the total amount. And then we had the overhead-free frame or version in which we said we received that donation from that large donor, and that donation is going to cover all our overhead costs, meaning that and we didn't say that, but the implication was that your donation is overhead-free, okay? And the results were kind of impressive. In the control, SID and match were essentially the same, and in the overhead-free donation, this was how much people gave. And the increase, I don't have it here because this is not the focus of this talk, but the increase in how much people in the total raised was not from additional donors. It was really because, no, it wasn't by increase, sorry, of how much people pay on mean payments or mean donations. It was an increase of how much people actually gave. So the donation was about $20, 21, 22, and we just had way more people willing to donate. And this is not willing to donate. This is people actually mailing their donations in. So we received some positive emails following the publication of the paper, and we received some people being very upset with us. And those being upset with us were people from the industry. Those were people that are trying to engage in or are working in development, trying to raise funds for various charities. And one block, right, one kind of thing that they face all the time is people don't want to give because of overhead, right? If a person hears, right, that the overhead is high, they don't want to give. And there's been huge attempts in the past few years trying to educate individuals, right, that overhead is something that we actually need, right? So it's not that a charity can work out of thin air, right? And today it was mentioned in the morning, it's like a business sector, right? It's like a business needs a CEO, and guess what? A charity needs a CEO as well. It's not different. So for them, it's an uphill battle, and what they felt that we did in this study is that we came and we said, you're right, overhead cost is not fun, and that's why we had someone else cover it. And right, we kind of support this notion of, even if implicitly that overhead is not great, maybe it's not so appealing, by having someone else go and cover it and coming out with our appeal. What we couldn't report in this paper, like Ashley, is that you don't report all the studies that you didn't succeed in, right? So all the studies that failed. So this project started with many, many failed studies, other experiments in which that's exactly what we tried to do. We tried to tell people or to de-bias their behavior, to tell them, well, maybe you do want to give, even if overhead is high. So, before I go there, because Jim is here. No, I didn't know he was going to be here. We explained, and this is critical, we explained our main result, and I'm not talking mediation, I'm just showing a path, right? That essentially the reason overhead is so aversive is because it decreases my sense of perceived impact, right? I don't feel that I'm really making that much of an impact with my money, because guess what? Paying someone's salary doesn't feel as good or as having impact as feeding a child, right? Or giving them shoes to wear, which decreases my sense of happiness and warm glow, how good I'm feeling about my donation, which in turn actually, decreases the likelihood I will give. Okay, so what did you do in trying to mitigate overhead aversion? Those were all lab studies, some with incentive compatible, meaning that people actually, it involved actual money decisions, other not. We're just hypothetical. One way we try to do this is provide information about charity's effectiveness. Okay, so telling this charity, so some people are being told, right, that there's a control, high overhead, low overhead. Sometimes we had a medium overhead, and we tell them this charity is very effective. It has been feeding blah 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 blah, and so had no effect. So I said, well, maybe effectiveness, just as as a number, or percentage is not enough. So maybe we want to do relative effectiveness, right? It's like the top, or among the top 3 charities nationwide, worldwide, you name it, that caters to this problem. Let's say hunger. It didn't work. We tried, better approach, right? So in this experiment, again, we varied overhead level, and we told all participants that some people believe that overhead is bad and don't want to donate because of overhead, and we explain why they don't want to donate because of high overhead. But we told them, but you probably know better, right? Because you know that we need, right, to have, administrative costs, etc. It didn't help. We tried the building blocks approach, which is really explaining the rationale, right, that you really have to have the strong leadership, etc. Didn't help. We tried the animated building blocks, which is there's a cartoon, not a cartoon, animated clip that Liz, who is not my student anymore, found online. It changed the effect directionally, and I don't like directionally, especially not when your sample size is 100%. Okay, so if you only get a bit of direction with 100 individuals in each condition, then you don't have an effect. You just don't have it. So nothing. And then Liz had to go to the market, which is why we said, okay, let's drop that one. Let's get a study that works and get back to this after the fact. So we said, okay, maybe another approach. Maybe instead of talking overhead, maybe we look at this one specific type of overhead cost. Okay, let's try and break it down to something that is more concrete, and maybe then we can try and better understand what is going on and maybe the bias. And we went with CEO compensation. Now, the reason we went with CEO compensation is because it's clear, it's intuitive, people understand it, and because guess what? If you go and you look in the media about not so good press for nonprofits and about overhead costs, this is the #1 thing that comes up, right? I spoke to some very, very intelligent people. One of them is my cousin in Israel, and I tried to explain to him why CEOs of nonprofits, it's okay if they make money, and he just didn't get it. Really, he just didn't get it. It's a very unpleasant, for some reason, thought. Hypothetical studies. By the way, each of these studies was replicated. It was replicated several times. So we made up a charity, Pario, and we told participants that it was either a nonprofit or a for-profit. And we gave them a description of the charity, and we said that this is of the company, that it's a company organization that works on drug development, to help, cure all kinds of bad diseases in all over the world. And then we told individuals that, to imagine that they were on a hiring committee, like team, whatever, in that working for the company, hiring committee, looking for a new CEO, someone that will come and take over the company. And we found that they found a candidate, Casey. Casey, if you note, can be either male or female. We had the first one, we had a female name, and then we said, oh, that's not good because, you know, females and charity feels so soft and fuzzy and fluffy, so maybe that's why people don't want to pay money. So we had to go with a male, with a kind of neutral name. And we tell them that Casey is essentially the optimal. We don't say it in those words, but she's a very good candidate. She's going to take the company or the nonprofit to like new places, new horizons, help achieve the mission and whatnot. And we told them that their current salary is $250,000. And the decision they had to make is the following. What salary would you recommend to offer Casey? Okay? When I'm saying bipolar scale, it's not really representative. We asked them this question, and they had this scale. 250 was in the middle, and then we had increments, right? They could move the scale of, like, you know, of to 25, right? $1,000 in each direction, right? So they could decide to give Casey just when, the current salary, or more, or less. The results, so you have on the x-axis whether it was a for-profit and a non-profit. On the left-hand side, how much salary was offered. And essentially, in the case of non-profit, she was offered precisely what she's making now. There's no significant difference between the 250. And in the case of for-profit, she was offered much more. And this also replicated in another study, the likelihood of offering her or him less than what he or her are making now was significantly higher in the case of the non-profit versus the for-profit. It was essentially non-existent for the for-profit, and we had more than a few in the case of for-profit. Oh, the non-profit, I'm sorry. So the next thing we wanted to see if this kind of perceptions or thoughts about compensation of CEOs in non-profits also impact donations of, you know, the layperson like us. We took, again, in the participants, we had this done both in the lab and on Amtrak. Again, a fake global health charity that we made up. This was the description. We said this is a global health charity, and this was just a nonprofit. It's a charity that employs a number of individuals. We explained what the nonprofit does, and that it employs various individuals, among them the CEO, and we told them what the salary of the CEO was. This is what was our main kind of variable that we varied. I don't have to do this, I know. And these were the salaries that we used. Liz actually went and did research and found, you know, did everything that she needed to do and identified the numbers, like the low that is kind of the most common, right, the most reasonable. Low salary, kind of medium, and high. And then we asked them, how likely are you to donate this charity? How likely would you be to donate to the charity? And this was just a 7-point scale. And the results are essentially, right? So the lower the salary, the more likely people actually to give money to the charity. And they didn't get much information about the charity, okay? So that was just about what the charity does. There was no impact or effectiveness or whatnot. So the conclusions, I don't have to read this to you. As Jim said earlier, you can read yourself. So they are here on the board. And what we try to do in this next study is really to try to understand what is it really that makes people feel that CEOs in nonprofit shouldn't be making money. Okay, why? And what we did here was maybe what we should have done starting this project off to kind of understand what world we're living in. And we did sort of more of a survey or study that involves factor analysis. So what we tried to do is really identify what were the factors, right, that kind of were guiding this decision or these perceptions. We went online and we read and we talked to people. We tried essentially to capture first like a large variety, right? To create a long list of reasons why people think CEOs of nonprofits shouldn't be making much money. A handful of those are here. Poor resource allocation was one, right? And this is the idea that it really takes from the charity. Now, I'm not in the nonprofit world. It's so disturbing for me just to say that, right? I mean, it doesn't take from the charity, because if you have the best charity and it doesn't have a leadership, nothing will happen. Okay, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sorry. Okay, so and it's inefficient. There was this, the feeling that we rephrased that the CEO gets utility in other ways. And I know that there is a very strong, valid economic model that talks about why actually we should pay CEOs and nonprofits less. But with the permission of the economists among you, we will not go into that now. But essentially, right, the person gets utility both by feeling good about themselves. They can also go and talk about it, right? So they can actually go and say, oh, look at me, I'm a great person, I work for a nonprofit. So they get utility, which is an equivalent of money or something, right? So we can pay them less, or should pay them less. And these are things that participants in previous studies said, that they should work not for the money, but because they work, they should be willing to sacrifice. That the CEO should be willing to earn less, and they should be volunteering their time. For real, okay? People think they shouldn't be paid. So there was this notion of nonprofit CEOs' job isn't as demanding as the one in the equivalent in the for-profit sector, and generally that they don't need a director or CEO nonprofits, that they can just run without that. So we took 10 kind of statements that captured less than 10 factors, and we presented participants. This was an Amtech. We presented them an article that was released in the news. I can't remember in which newspaper, about the salary of the new CEO of Save the Children. I believe this was in 2000, either 14 or 13, the news piece. That salary was $401K, which is clearly a high salary, right? And then we presented them with a bunch of all these, the factors that I told you, the statements, and we asked them just to indicate the extent to which they agree with each of those, right? So it was kind of a scale. And then we did our analysis, and the 3 factors that emerged as kind of explaining were the following. Resource allocation was the number 1, and that explains 32% of the variance in people's responses. Perceptions of nonprofit, this is how I call it here. We can give it another name. The idea that there's no need for a CEO and the job is kind of easy, it's not as demanding, so you can get someone less skilled than you would otherwise. And that the CEO benefits in other ways, so the utility explanation. And in all, these 3 explain almost 80% of the variance, which is huge. Now, Ashley said, and I agree, she started her presentation with the pyramid and with the realization that she and Eugene had that it's really tough to change people's minds, right? Now, I'm inviting all of us, me included, to try and change people's perceptions. I think it will be very, very, very difficult, if not impossible. So the question is now what? So probably not. That's what I would try to convince people of. That's what I would try to go and say, but clearly, or not clearly, this is not my job. I'm not good at this. I'm relatively good at what I do in this world. And really the notion is that we could, but should we, right? It would really be an uphill battle. I don't know if you're familiar with Dan Pelota's work on overhead. So our entire project on overhead started actually because I was teaching MBA students about social entrepreneurship. I assigned the book, which I haven't read before. I started reading the book and I was like, oh, that's going to be fun. So that's how it started. I believe he has a TED Talk or 2 of those already. Lots of talking, lots of money, a lot of effort. I doubt it, I don't know. I doubt he really has been able to make much change in people's perceptions. This billboard, Dan Pelota actually emailed it to his people on his email list. I'm on his email list as it appears, only because I emailed him sometime, never mind. And he says, don't ask if a charity has a low overhead, ask if it has big impact. And I did email him after I received this one, and I emailed him with my emphasis on this one, and the impact thing. And I think that I know, and I heard several people today talked about this notion of impact and effectiveness, right? And I want to know how the charity is doing, what it's doing, and we have a big problem with this. We have a huge problem with impact, right? And I want to give you And this is the doomsday, no. But and okay, I'll give you the example. Hunger in San Diego. So I had a student go and do the survey for me. We have 30 nonprofits catering for hungry people in San Diego. Some of them are like local chapters of national organizations. You can go over these. This is what different of them, each of them, is using to report success, okay? So one will say how many, one will report the number, the increase in number of homes that they visit. I don't know how what that has to do exactly with hunger, but okay, maybe it does in an indirect way. Another will say number of meals donated, right? Others will say, by the way, the number of increase in number of meals donated, and that's not the same. One is the absolute number, the other one is increase, okay? Most of them have more than one, so you would have like two or three, most of them. So 3 nonprofits, an estimated 45, 50 measures, okay? Now, say that I want to go and I want to donate to one of them. I'm going and looking at this and I'm clueless. There's no way. If we're talking about relative impact or relative something, there's no way for me to do any of that, right? So guess what I'm doing? I'm using overhead. I have until this is fixed, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have multiple measures for each nonprofit, right? So clearly, if you do A, B, and C, and D, fine. Talk about all of that. But there should be this one. If all of us are worried about tackling or decreasing the number of hungry people, say, in San Diego, let's use how many less people are hungry in San Diego now. Or something like that, and let's have it, the same, something that you can actually go and compare, something comparable that they can use across. And I think that until we have that in all sectors, right, so all nonprofit sectors, that people can actually go and use, I don't think there's any reason why anyone shouldn't use overhead or wouldn't use overhead, because that's really the closest thing that they have to what we really want them to use. So that's my gloomy 5 cents. Thank you. Anyone know how to fix the world? Yeah. So I don't know enough about foundations. So let's put it that way. But I know a bit, and really not enough on nonprofits. And yeah.
Probably because foundations aren't raising money from the general public.
In part, I think if you were, so I think people's perceptions of nonprofits, and for all of you working in the nonprofit sector, I deeply apologize. It's not my perception; it's their perception. Is that it's a collection of very nice, warm, fuzzy people who are trying to do something nice, right? So they're like, not serious people. It's kind of a hobby. I don't think that there's so I think that if you went and you looked at that, and that's part of the perception of not-profit, no one would expect a Harvard graduate to go and head, not only because of money, because serious people go to financials, right? And they go to do serious things. They don't do this kind of fluffy thing. This seems almost like a hobby, a side sort of occupation that someone searches for themselves, either when they're about to retire, or because they cannot do something better, or because they're a bit, not okay up here. But I don't think it's being perceived as like a serious job or business. That's my take. Yeah.
I'm a township supervisor and the administrator general assistant, which is done in tax dollars. And we have the same problem. We have people complaining all the time that we administer our programs and too much money.
Really?
And that they compare the financial impact or the actual amount of dollars that we spend on aid to the amount of money that we spend on our staff. And they say that we spend too much money on staff with the money that we give away. But the money that we give away is only part of what we provide in terms of service to our clients.
Right.
So it's hard to
Right.
those other, aspects of relief that we provide.
Right.
We refer to other agencies, we, hook them up with volunteers that help them out, we refer them to our food pantry. None of these things cost, don't show up as a line item in giving.
And maybe they should, right? I mean, and everything you can assign a number of sorts to everything, right? It only becomes meaningful if it's comparable, right? If it's used by others. If it's only used by you, 10, right? So what does that mean? And it's a problem. And I talked to Stacy, the moderator from, correct name. So I talked to her briefly after her presentation, and I told her that this, the last slide, I cannot do this. No, seriously, this is not something I could ever, push for. It takes people with power in this world and people that can influence, and it takes like the Gateses and the Skolls and the Blomberg and whatnot to come together and say this is something important to us. Now I will say that I'm told the Charity Navigator is really trying to develop. If you go to their Charity Navigator page, there is a tab for impact for each charity, and then it says under development or something like that. They are trying, but I think it will take a while. Yeah.
I wonder if there's a relationship between the last presentation and yours, or even if you studied within yours about perceptions among income when it comes to CPA. So one assumption could be that those who are have greater wealth or higher income would be a little more sympathetic to a higher paid CEO versus those who are on the lower income scale and have a difficulty with the charity that's paying their CEO.
So we think, so one question we received after the first result I showed you, so one question we received is like, okay, and how are you going to get those fancy large donors to give you money to cover overhead costs, right? So that's, right? There is, right? And we didn't think, although I think there will be a correlation between, large donors, right? So people who are rich, right? And, clearly, okay. But I do think that people who are professional givers, who are like those philanthropists that give, I think they can get it. I think they get the need for overhead, right?
Well, I think they see and they look at it as a
Yeah.
large charity, especially as just a well-run business.
Right.
So just like they're used to investing in businesses,
Right.
running their own businesses, they see that. I don't really think, I have trouble with the issue of larger donors trying to provide overhead dollars, trying to provide the dollars for overhead costs for larger organizations, because I think at the same time, they're also looking for the impact, and they're also looking for using their dollars effectively, and they'd rather see the impact of solving the societal problem rather than providing the overhead.
And I want to argue with you and say that and okay, and then I will tell you what I'm guilty of, okay? You can have more impact by hiring a good leader, a good CEO, spending on overhead than you might have on buying food and trucks to deliver the food, okay? Your impact can be, it doesn't feel as good, right? It doesn't feel as good. And where I'm guilty at is that the best example, I was visiting Kenya, the Maasai, a village of the Maasai, and it's a lodge, right? And it's like fancy, but very down to earth, very like zero carbon footprint and whatnot. The guy who's managing it, who built it, who did everything, he's an Italian guy, Luca, most charming Italian guy. Has been forever and ever, created an amazing partnership with the Maasai group there, specific ranch. Amazing. 3 years he was showering with cold, buckets with cold water, and his wife and whatnot. The cost per night, per person, is $750 plus in a tent, fancy, but a tent. Plus, I think, $100 per night conservation fee. Okay, and clearly I stayed there I worked with him, so I got it 50% off. Yeah, still very expensive. We stayed there for 7 nights, okay? And he's not, maybe he's rich, maybe he's not, I don't know. But his daughter is going to private school now, okay? Like French private school outside Nairobi. And I couldn't resent him from time to time for making so much money at my expense. So the lodge is his. He does, the conservation fee goes to the Maasai Conservation Trust. Fine. I couldn't help kind of being annoyed that he's like making so much money at my account, right? Kind of under the cover that he's doing good and helping the Messiah, right? I did the same. I really rather see him not live in the fancy house that he built behind the tents and with the swimming pool and everything. I would really rather see him live in a tent with hot water only, by the way, even if you pay $750 per night, only when the sun is shining that day, because if it's not shining, you're showering in cold water as a guest with $750 per night per person in the tent. So I'm the same. It took me several times to say, well, but if he wasn't making the money and if he wasn't able to live the life that he lives, he wouldn't be here and he wouldn't be doing all the good things. And he's doing amazing things, all the good things that he's doing. So I disagree with you, and I'm guilty of the same. 100%. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, going back to that last slide you showed, it seems to me like it's just a result of the competition among charities, especially in this case, right? And it's just a form of product differentiation.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have the alternative where they all had to report
Yeah.
the same statistic, like the overhead rate. Well, then the guy, just like the charity with the highest overhead rate is going to get the less
I agree.
money. Then here you're going to have that one outcome, and that's the charity that gets it. And that's why the other charities are coming up with some other outcome.
Right.
Right. And so it's just like
I think it's a huge part of it, no doubt, right? So if there are only two of them, yeah, we would have way less, and maybe even the same, but now it becomes really confusing. And this is one way to differentiate yourself. But I think there's also the other piece, where the leadership is really not 100% professional and knows what it's doing. So it's reporting what seems to them to be important, right? And John was talking this morning about development and programming. So you know latrines, right? Latrines that you install in developing world because people are drinking contaminated water and those are really not good for them because the same water where they poop and they pee and whatnot. So a nonprofit, well-known one, I heard from people in UNICEF, so I'm sure with what I'm saying. So they go and they have all the intervention. They bring people to the center of the square and they show them how the flies go from the poop to the people, fine. And then they build the latrines. And then they go back home, and then they report their success. Their success matrix is 1. Anyone can guess? Number of latrines. Number of latrines. And it's completely unimportant. It's completely unimportant how many. You can have 1 and have everyone use it, and you can have 10 and no one uses it. And even that's not important because the only thing you care is about the infectious diseases and how many less people die or become sick, right? So, yeah, huge space for improvement. Yeah.
Having taught social entrepreneurship, which we've come across like impacting investment, which has become pretty popular nowadays.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you think that can help solve the tension between organizations that stand for doing good, but also have a business-minded way of operating.
Yeah. I think it will solve the tension. I think it will create other tensions. Creating them is a tension. I think once they're created and if they have a good model, I think, yes, it will. Yeah. Okay, everyone, I'm sorry for going over.